This week on QDL, plotting the dots on COVID-19, we look at how semilog charts can help you make sense of the pandemic. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live. It's been a while, a few weeks, but I see some familiar faces out there. Hi, Carl. Hi, Alan. Hi, Bill. I know you're all out there somewhere. In today's show, I want to recap some of the articles we ran over the past few weeks that were COVID-19 related. In case you missed them, these were some really interesting takes on either the virus itself and how it spreads, or how companies have dealt with it, and quite a few of those are working remotely. So there are a few articles that looked at the spread of the virus using widely available data. The most widely read were three articles co-written by Don Wheeler, Al Phadt, and Kathryn Whyte. You all know Don Wheeler, industrial statistician, a popular writer with us. Al Phadt is a medical researcher, and Kathryn Whyte works at Johns Hopkins. A link to that first article in that series is below. You can just go there and then you'll see sub-navigation that'll let you get to the other articles in the series. So in a nutshell, what these articles did was to take data available from the European CDC. There's many sources for these data. The authors chose the European CDC, Worldometers, another choice, Johns Hopkins. And what they did was to simply look at the cumulative totals of US COVID-19 cases and deaths starting from the beginning of March. These totals were then plotted on a semilog chart. The goal was to show not only a much clearer view of the history of the virus than we typically see in the media, but to show how this simple chart gives you an immediate view into how we are progressing in flattening the curve and what happens if we don't. You see, you rarely see a semilog charts used in mainstream media. I've seen them a couple times. Mostly what you see is kind of the daily linear plots of cases, and that's typically what you see. However, the problem with those is you don't get as clear a view as you do with a semilog chart. And it's kind of the shame that media don't use those because they really are very useful and they're also very easy to explain. So this is all about just plotting the dots. There is no statistical analysis, there's no data manipulation, and there is no modeling. Strictly plot the dots. So we're going to take a look at one of these charts here in just a little bit. I'm using one very similar to the one the authors created, and I use this I created this in Excel using data from Worldometer. And I chose Worldometer because the data is very close to that data found on the European CDC or Johns Hopkins websites, but it's just a whole lot easier to get to, easier to extract. So first, if you aren't familiar with a semilog chart, it is useful for looking at rates of change, particularly when data grows exponentially, as is the case obviously in infectious diseases. In a semilog chart, the slope of the line actually represents the rate of change. The steeper the slope, the higher the rate of change, or in the case of a disease, the faster the disease is growing. A straight line, no matter what the slope is, means the rate is constant. A horizontal line means the data isn't changing at all. So in the case of a virus, if you see a horizontal line on a semilog chart, it means no new cases have coming in. You've stopped it. It's no longer reproducing. If the line starts to curve either up or down, it means the rate is changing. Hopefully we want to see a flattening of the curve, right? Very simple. So let's take a look. I'm going to go to a screen share here, and we are going to look at a semilog chart in a couple different ways. Let me just go to my screen share. Okay. So what you're looking at here is just three straight lines. This is fictitious data. This would represent a couple different rates of growth plotted on a semilog chart. So this first one, this blue line, this is what it might look like if cases were doubling every day. This orange line here, this is if cases were doubling maybe every other day or every third day. This gray line, notice the slopes are getting smaller. This gray line is if cases were doubling maybe every 10 days. And of course, as I said, if you had a horizontal line, it means cases were stopped. No new cases coming in. You're frozen in your tracks, which is ideally what we would want to see. The nice thing about this is that you can take these lines and you can extend them out into the future. So if we were to take this orange line and simply take this line and extend it out into the future. Now remember, this is perfect data. We could pick any point in the future and say, here is what the data will be on this date. Now, of course, in real life, things don't move exactly like this in a straight line. They bobble up and down, but you get the idea. And we'll see what kind of the value is of this by actually looking at the data that was processed for COVID-19. So I'm going to go to a different screen share here. Let me just get over to that. We are going to look at, this is actual COVID-19 data. We are looking now at, you should be seeing a curve on your screen. This is actually total deaths in the United States, starting from, scroll down here, starting from, it looks like middle of February, almost beginning of March. So this is the actual US data. Now, if you look at this, this is something that any of you can do. You can see that we have roughly a straight line of dots here at the bottom. This was early on in the growth, started off at this slope. Then we had maybe 10 or 12 days in a row where the dots are all lined up. And if we connect all those and extend them out into the future, you can see why health researchers around the world were freaking out. They weren't freaking out just in the United States. They were freaking out around the world because epidemiologists around the world were using things like a semilog chart and models and a lot of other things to project into the future. On the semilog chart, you can easily see that if you extend this all the way out, it hits 1 million deaths in the United States by around the middle of April. And if you'll remember, those were some of the numbers being thrown around early on. This is the reason why. It wasn't made up data. This is based on historical data, based on current, on the cases up to that point. Now, fortunately, we started instituting measures, social distancing and so forth around the United States. And we saw this, this start to curve, start to slow down. And so then we had kind of a run of lines, maybe about a week or so here, much shallower. And then we got it even more. Now look at this. We've had several weeks in a row with a fairly straight line. It's still moving upwards. We still have cases coming in. It's not flat. In fact, let's scroll down here a little bit, closer view of that same data. You can see a bunch of points in a row here, moving up towards the right, much slower. And if we project this into the future, we will see, roughly 80,000 within a week from today, 10 days from today or so, maybe 5 days from today. If we project it all the way out into the future, we're seeing 100,000 by the beginning of next month. Of course, that is probably going to come down a little bit, so we may not see that. But this, again, we're just saying, if you see a change in the rate, you will see this curve start to move. Now, the other thing this means is that if as we open up the economy and people start to go back to work, if there is a surge in cases, it will show up very easily on this chart because you will see this start to curve up. Very quickly, you'll be able to spot whether opening up the economy is working or not. Hopefully, it will be fine and we will continue to see this curve flatten. So this is a lot of what Wheeler was talking about in the first two articles. The second article in the series was simply a recap of the first article with some new data. It was a week later. He was rolling in some more data and kind of touches on what a semilog chart does some more. Now, in this third article, which is really interesting, he does something really fascinating. He takes the semilog chart from the United States as well as other countries and does some comparison between what is happening in the United States, what is happening in some other countries. But what's really fascinating is when he compares Sweden and Norway. And I want to talk about this a little bit. You should see another chart in front of you here with a series of blue dots and a series of red dots. The blue dots are Norway. The red dots are Sweden. Now, what a lot of people don't know, Sweden and Norway are right next to each other and they have very similar demographics. Really, the main difference between Sweden and Norway is the population. Sweden's got about twice the population of Norway. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So what we see here is their COVID-19 cases started at about the same time, basically about the middle of March. You see Sweden and Norway tracked very close with each other in terms of the rate of change. Remember, we're plotting rate of change here. They both hit kind of a change of rate at about the same time. And then Norway implemented social distancing. And they implemented social distancing in a way that was much more strict than Sweden. Sweden also implemented some mitigating measures, but it was not as strict as Norway. Sweden basically kept their economy going with some exceptions. And of course, the people in Norway are smart people, and they also knew to kind of keep their distance from each other as well without being told. But what this chart really clearly shows is you can see Norway immediately did a very quick flattening of the curve. And Sweden, with very similar demographics, but less stringent mitigation, continued to grow with a little bit of flattening, again, probably because of the mitigations they implemented, as well as just the general population doing the smart thing and kind of keeping their distance from each other. Now, I did mention that there is a difference in population, and I do want to show you, I do want to account for that a little bit. So what you see down here is not a semilog chart. This is just a regular chart, Sweden versus Norway, but here we are looking at cases per million. So this now kind of puts an apples and apples comparison between the two. And I want to show you something on here which is interesting. So even though now we are looking at cases per million, what you see is Norway started off actually a little bit worse case than Sweden. Their cases per million were actually higher than Sweden. But once they hit that point where they started to flatten the curve, you can see Norway immediately flattened out, and Sweden kept on continuing its growth in cases per million. So even when we compensate for the differences in population, we do see that there is a significant difference between Sweden and Norway. Now, how all this works out in the end, we don't know. Don't want to really talk about that because we don't know. We won't know for a year or maybe more which method was the best route. But those are very interesting charts. And if you want to read all three of, there we go. So if you want to read all three of those articles, like I said, there's a link down below and you can take a look at those. Okay, now for you math maniacs, you math nerds out there, Bill Levinson also had an interesting article, but very mathy. It was, in his article, dealt with breaking the COVID-19 curve, not just flattening, but breaking it. And it involves a lot of calculus and a lot of funny looking Greek symbols. But what he does is to explain, mainly what he does is to explain R0 or R-naught. Some of you have probably heard that term. And he talks about how R-naught is used and what the effect of R-naught, what the impact would be on R-naught with various mitigations. If you don't know, R-naught is a disease's basic reproduction number. It is the average number of people whom a contagious person will infect when all individuals in the population are susceptible to infection and in the absence of any countermeasures like social distancing or a vaccine or something. So, in other words, if you have an R-naught of 2, it means that an infected person will infect, on average, 2 other people. And of course, each of those 2 people infect 2 other people and so forth, and you get an exponential growth. COVID-19, by the way, has an R-naught of 2.6, according to current research. So Levinson then explains what this means in terms of transmission and how we break the curve by bringing R-naught down to less than 1. He also discusses the impact of social distancing as well as vaccines at different R-naught values, along with support research and a whole lot of math. So if you're math nerds, you're really going to like this article. Okay, finally, let's get away from the math and the charts and everything. We had several articles rated to let's call it the new workplace, the new norm in the workplace. And one very useful article we found was from a blog that we covered quite a bit, The Conversation. That's the name of the blog. And this article was written by Paula, Caligiuri, and Helen Cieri. In 4 ways companies can support their workers during the coronavirus crisis, the authors provide 4 research-backed ways that companies can promote their employees' health and well-being during the crisis. So I want to run through those 4 things just really quick here. Number 1, provide more flexibility. Working from home affects every employee differently depending on their responsibilities and their living situations, according to the authors, and of course, according to common sense. For example, a single person working from home has different needs than someone with young children. We've all seen those videos. So employer flexibility is the key. The authors suggest that managers talk with their employees about how and when work can be accomplished, and then offer flexibility on things like maybe work hours or when assignments need to be turned in. By the way, employees, let your managers know what your needs are. Don't assume they know. You're not in the office, you're working remotely. They don't know what's going on there. Tell them. Common sense. Okay, number 2, encourage and host virtual social time. Look, we've all been doing this at home, right? How many of you have had virtual martini parties? My wife and I, we had a virtual wine tasting party over Zoom. Social isolation is a big deal for some people. Not for all, but for some people it is. So the authors suggest that employers encourage their workers to have virtual coffees or virtual lunches or even virtual happy hours with their colleagues, maybe even mark birthdays or other milestones with video conference calls. Keep everybody in the loop, keep them communicating with each other. Quality Digest, we call it QD, has been a completely virtual office for more than 2 years. And we are constantly having random chats, sharing YouTube videos, even running jokes throughout the day. Far from it being a waste of time, it actually provides a bit of a break from just staring at your screen. Okay, number 3, train for online collaboration. The authors point out that it's easy to presume that employees will be effective working remotely as long as you just throw the right technological tools at them, right? Here's a video camera, here's some chat software, go for it, have a great time. But it really depends on the employee. Some employees adapt to these online collaboration tools very quickly and feel comfortable with them. Others don't. At Quality Digest, we are all comfortable with mainly using chat and resorting to voice calls only for more complex discussions or for meetings, of course. But the authors point out that in some situations, it may make sense to train your employees on the various remote tools that they're using. Even if they know how to use them technically, there's still good ways and bad ways to use tools. So do some training there, establish some ground rules for the use, and maybe build awareness of individual and cultural differences in communication, including maybe some people's preferences for email or phone calls or conference calls. Not everybody feels comfortable chatting or doing video conferencing. Finally, number 4, foster positive coping. We can't downplay that isolation and even fear of the pandemic itself is impacting some people in negative ways. Some people do not deal with isolation well at all, and some people are truly fearful. I mean, scared in their heart of what is going on with the virus. In fact, according to the authors, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline has experienced an unprecedented jump in calls. And even chatbot counseling apps have seen an uptick in recent weeks. People are scared. So the authors write that in normal times, companies can offer a variety of ways to support employees' mental and physical health, things like social activities to gym memberships. But of course, with workers at home and fitness centers closed, those solutions are kind of out of the mix, right? So companies can help, and some already are, by offering things like tutorials on mindfulness or webinars on resilience. Our COO has found a great resource that she's using that makes her feel better. Reminding workers of employee assistance programs is also important, or simply suggesting to workers to go out for a walk. Sometimes your employees just need to be told it's okay to seek outside resources to make you feel better, or to get up and go for a walk, take a break. The important thing is that consistent and clear information about healthcare risks and preventative measures need to be passed on to employees, and as well as available resources. This is the best way for company leaders to keep their employees safe and foster well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, good suggestions. By the way, those same suggestions are going to be great suggestions when we head back to work as normal, because a lot of companies are going to keep employees working from home because they found, hey, this actually worked pretty well. But those same needs are going to be in place. All right. So that is it for our show today. As usual, if there is someone or something you would like to see on the show, or some topic you would like us to cover, send those ideas to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com, and we will try our best to cover those topics or bring those people on the show. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you on the next QDL